December 17, 1944. 0530 hours. Hansfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's engine coughed, sputtered, then died. SS-Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the turret hatch, the metallic clang echoing through the pre-dawn darkness. His driver, Unterscharfer Weber, attempted to restart the 700 horsepower Maybach engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read empty. Sturmmann Weber called up from his compartment, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The reserve tank was also dry. Peiper climbed down from his command tank, his boots crunching on the frozen Belgian soil. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead the Wehrmacht had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes offensive, sat motionless. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS soldiers, all paralyzed by empty fuel tanks. Through the morning mist, Peiper could see the abandoned American position ahead. Hansfeld, a critical supply depot for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. The Americans had fled so quickly they had left fires still burning in oil drums, coffee still hot in metal cups. And there, lined up like a gift from the god of war himself, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans. Thousands of them. The distinctive olive-drab American fuel containers. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently. His adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruel, pried open one can and sniffed. Benzene. High-octane gasoline. Peiper's men began the frantic work of refueling their vehicles. Peiper walked among the stockpile, counting. The mathematics were staggering. 50,000 gallons. Enough to fuel his entire Kampfgruppe for the push to the Meuse River. Enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single depot than most German divisions had received in the past 6 months. But as Peiper stood among this bounty, watching his men pour American fuel into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to abandon such quantities, if they could leave behind what Germany would guard with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany had not just miscalculated. Germany had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. To comprehend the shock of Peiper's discovery, one must first understand the terminal fuel crisis that had already sealed the Third Reich's fate. 6 months before Hansfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, presented the Führer with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany's synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had been systematically annihilated by Allied bombing. The Luna Works, which had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April, managed only 5,000 tons by September. The gigantic hydrogenation plants at Politz, Blechhammer, and Brucks were operating at less than 10% capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production and the captured Romanian fields, managed 33 million barrels. Less than 2% of American production. The Third Reich was attempting to wage mechanized warfare with horse-drawn logistics. While America was drowning its armies in petroleum abundance, Major Friedrich Sussman of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million gallons, but only half was actually delivered due to shattered railways and constant aerial interdiction. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had constructed a petroleum pipeline system across France called Pluto, Pipeline Under the Ocean, and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system that delivered 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 1.2 million gallons of fuel per day and receiving 1.4 million gallons. They were accumulating reserves while fighting a continent-wide war. Joachim Peiper was not a fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, a veteran of the Eastern Front where he had learned that in modern warfare, fuel was more precious than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had been designated the Schwerpunkt, the decisive point of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14th, 2 days before the attack, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commanding the 6th SS Panzer Army, was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." The fuel allocation for Kampfgruppe Peiper was 31,000 gallons. Enough for 50 miles of combat operations. The distance to the Meuse was 65 miles. The mathematics of failure were built into the plan from the beginning. As his column prepared to advance on December 16th, Peiper issued strict orders. Tanks would operate in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut off during any halt longer than 5 minutes. And the capture of American fuel dumps was priority 1, above even tactical objectives. The contrast with American operations could not have been starker. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, stationed just 20 miles from Peiper's starting position, recorded in his unit diary. Received fuel resupply 8,000 gallons. Third delivery this week. Storage tanks already at capacity. December 16, 1944. 0530 hours. The German artillery barrage that opened Operation Watch on the Rhine used more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht had allocated for entire operations earlier in the war. But even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Peiper's column began moving at 7 a.m., already behind schedule. The roads, which on German maps appeared as highways, were narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, monumental traffic jams developed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the tight Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, Peiper's first objective, they encountered unexpected resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Peiper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Hansfeld at dawn on December 17th, Peiper's column had covered 20 miles and consumed 40% of their total fuel. At this rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the Meuse. The American supply depot at Hansfeld was not even a primary facility. It was a forward supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a Class 3B depot, a temporary fuel station. Yet what Peiper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. Hauptsturmführer Hans Groh later testified, "We found pyramids of jerry cans, each containing 5 gallons of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, extending for perhaps 200 meters. The Americans had not even attempted to destroy them. The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in the Tiger tanks, were designed for 74-octane fuel. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine knock and overheating in several German vehicles. As Peiper's men refueled, they made even more devastating discoveries. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffmann found shipping manifests in the depot office. He could read English, having worked in his father's import business before the war. The papers indicated this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, across the Atlantic to Liverpool, across the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 400 miles to Hansfeld. A journey of over 6,000 miles had taken less than 6 weeks. I showed the papers to Obersturmbannführer Peiper. Hoffmann recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what this meant. Private Ernst Caro found a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated December 15th, just 2 days old. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. A single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Kampfgruppe Peiper would use in the entire offensive. To comprehend the psychological devastation, one must understand Germany's home front. Since May, Allied bombing had reduced synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been cut from 250 flight hours to 60. German civilians had not seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo investigated black market theft of individual liters. Farmers were returning to horse-drawn plows. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone produced more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, Peiper's columns surged forward. They reached Bulge by noon, capturing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and most critically, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a disturbing truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. The U.S. First Army alone had 3.5 million gallons in immediate reserve. Peiper pushed on to Ligneville, where his forces would commit the Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. Even this war crime was connected to fuel desperation. Peiper later claimed he could not spare gasoline to transport prisoners. By evening on December 17th, Peiper's spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a major American fuel depot containing over 2 million gallons. Here was enough fuel to guarantee reaching the Meuse and possibly Antwerp itself. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received warning of the German approach. His orders were simple: deny fuel to the enemy at all costs. The Stavelot depot contained 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in jerry cans stacked across 15 acres. At 1,630 hours, as Peiper's advance guard approached, Captain Brewster gave the order. Engineers poured gasoline trails between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades were distributed. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and tremendous, he recalled. A wall of fire shot up maybe 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Peiper's lead tanks arrived to find a pillar of black smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The fire would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. Unterscharfer Weber described the scene. The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons to deny them to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel dumps rather than risk capture. At Troisponts, 1.1 million gallons burned. At Spa, 2.5 million gallons were destroyed. In total, Americans deliberately destroyed over 8 million gallons during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. The ability to casually torch millions of gallons was rooted in a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies using 6,000 trucks operating around the clock. Each truck consumed 40 gallons daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than German Army Group B received in a month. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for First Army, recorded on December 18th. Fuel receipts yesterday 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves 224,000 gallons. They were building a surplus while under attack. As Peiper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the impossibility of the German position became an epidemic of realization spreading through the ranks. At Stilmont, they captured another depot, 5,000 gallons consumed in 3 hours of combat. Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons per mile in battle. Panthers burned 1.5 gallons per mile. In the difficult Ardennes terrain, consumption increased by 40%. Oberst Otto Dinkler, maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, recorded, "By noon on December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000 gallons. We were operating at a deficit." That same day, American C-47s flew 316 sorties delivering supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. Americans were flying more fuel to a surrounded garrison than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. The psychological impact was immediate and corrosive. Peiper called his commanders together. Sturmbannführer Werner Poch was blunt. "We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away." According to Hauptsturmführer Grill's testimony, Peiper then said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we captured at Hansfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization was spreading with the speed of rumor. General Otto von Manschenfeld, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, "When I learned Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk our capturing it, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Colonel Friedrich von der Heydt, captured on December 23rd, told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" The contrast extended beyond quantity into the very fabric of everyday life for the American soldier. Private First Class Richard McKinney wrote home from the Ardennes, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." German prisoners of war were more shocked by American waste than by firepower. Seeing GIs discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating shattered morale more profoundly than artillery. Oberstfreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote his wife, "Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks like we march. This war is lost." Every German who witnessed American casual abundance understood the war was hopeless. The psychological impact undermined the Nazi racial superiority narrative. How could the so-called decadent Americans possess such unimaginable wealth while the master race scraped for necessities? The myth of German superiority could not survive contact with American logistics. Field Marshal Walter Model received reports of captured American supplies on December 26. His chief of staff recorded Model's reaction. The Field Marshal read the quantities twice. 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld. 2 million burned at Stavelot. 8 million destroyed rather than captured. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler, informed on December 28, refused to accept reality. Speer wrote, "Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of burning Stavelot, he claimed it was Hollywood effects. But the lower ranks understood completely." Jurfreiter Hans Müller recorded on December 20th. "March 30 kilometers. No fuel for trucks. Past abandoned American vehicles with engines running for warmth. They leave engines running. We marched through snow. Medical services were crippled. Ambulances could not evacuate wounded. Hospitals could not run generators. Men died waiting for transportation that never came." Oberarzt Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting testified, "We had excellent surgeons, supplies captured from Americans, but no fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with 10 kilometers of transport." By December 21st, Peiper was surrounded at Log-Lise, his tanks immobile. American forces encircling him, the 30th Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne, and 3rd Armored, had a combined fuel allocation of 340,000 gallons for that single day. Peiper had perhaps 1,000 gallons left. On the night of December 23rd to 24th, he abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational but immobilized. These were destroyed with their remaining ammunition. Oberscharführer Heinz Goels described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, maybe 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment destroyed by empty fuel tanks." Of the 5,000 men who began with Kampfgruppe Peiper, approximately 770 returned. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and discovered the truth about Allied logistics. The final blow was the knowledge that the 50,000 gallons from Hansfeld, the seemingly miraculous windfall, was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days. Less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours. A rounding error in Allied daily consumption. The Ardennes fuel crisis was not an isolated incident. It was the final, undeniable proof of a strategic reality that had been building since 1942. Germany's industrial base, for all its fearsome reputation, was a fraction of America's. By 1944, the United States produced 50% of the world's manufacturing output. A new aircraft every 5 minutes. A ship every day. A tank every 7 minutes. The petroleum production statistics were even more overwhelming. United States, 1.8 billion barrels. Soviet Union, 110 million barrels. Germany, including all synthetic production, 33 million barrels. Japan, 2.6 million barrels. The Axis combined produced less than 2% of American petroleum. This disparity translated directly into battlefield outcomes. American refineries perfected catalytic cracking, producing higher octane fuels more efficiently than German hydrogenation could ever achieve. American 100-octane aviation fuel gave P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts performance advantages over German fighters running on 87-octane synthetic. The Luftwaffe was literally outgassed before it could fight. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been constrained by fuel. Every American offensive was supported by an abundance that German planners could not even conceive. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a revealing incident on December 27. A logistics officer reported that bad weather had reduced fuel deliveries to merely 500,000 gallons daily. There was concern at the headquarters until someone quietly noted that this reduced amount still exceeded Germany's total offensive allocation. American forces could absorb a crisis that represented more fuel than the entire German attack possessed. During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders consistently cited logistics, particularly fuel, as the decisive factor. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel testified, "We had operational superiority from 1940 to 1941. By 1944, we could not move forces for lack of fuel while Americans moved armies like chess pieces." General Heinz Guderian wrote in his memoirs, "When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, meaning everything to him but nothing to the Americans, the war was over." The historian Dr. Richard Overy calculated that by 1944, the Allied Axis production ratio exceeded 5-to-1 in major categories. In petroleum, it approached 50-to-1. These advantages could not be overcome by superior training, by tactical genius, or by ideological fanaticism. They represented the immutable mathematics of industrial warfare. The final irony came when American forces catalogued abandoned German equipment at log lees. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report noted, "Fuel required 8,000 gallons. Classification minimal. Source, local reserve. Time 4 hours." What was impossible for the Germans, 8,000 gallons to save their best tanks, was beneath American notice. A minor request using local reserves that exceeded Kampfgruppe Peiper's peak strength. The war was over not when Berlin fell, but when American industrial capacity mobilized fully. Hansfeld merely revealed what had been true since the first Liberty ship sailed and the first pipeline was laid. The Tiger tank sits today in the December 44 museum at Log Lees, its fuel gauge still frozen on empty, a silent monument to the moment tactical excellence met logistical reality and lost. Visitors often ask why such powerful tanks were simply abandoned. The answer requires no interpretation, only numbers. No fuel. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at Log Lees. Former Unterscharführer Karl Wortmann stood beside the tank with former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," Anderson said. "We thought it was tactical." Wortmann laughed bitterly. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that?" Anderson was quiet for a moment, then said, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much we never thought about it." That exchange captures the essential truth of December 1944. One side measured by the gallon, the other by the million. One fought for each jerry can, the other burned oceans without a second thought. The outcome was predetermined not by courage, not by will, but by refineries in Texas and pipelines under the English Channel. Peiper's discovery at Hansfeld was not just about fuel. It was the moment the German soldier understood he was not fighting a war, but participating in an execution ordained by industrial capacity. 50,000 gallons seemed like a miracle. But against a nation that could burn 8 million gallons just to deny it, a miracle was never going to be enough. So the question lingers across the decades, as relevant today as it was in the frozen Ardennes. How can any army, no matter how skilled, no matter how determined, ever hope to defeat an adversary that can afford to destroy more than you can produce? That was the question Joachim Peiper confronted in the pre-dawn darkness of December 17th. And it remains the ultimate lesson of the Battle of the Bulge.